The screen slowly brightens, 4 a.m. A phone buzz cuts through the darkness. Prime Minister Michael Callow rubs his groggy eyes, only to go pale in an instant. Cut to the streets of London, thousands of people glued to their phones, disbelief written all over their faces. The reflection of the live stream stings their eyes. Cut again, we see countless pairs of eyes staring at their screens, and in the pupils, the unmistakable outline of a pig. Yes, this isn't some absurd fever dream. This is where reality and fiction collide in the most grotesque of ways. Today, we're diving into a story once hailed as an artistic prophecy that pushed humanity's limits and condemned by critics as a ruthless dissection of human depravity. It's the globally renowned opening chapter of Black Mirror, Season 1, Episode 1, The National Anthem. But beneath its bizarre, even grotesque premise, is this episode just shock value bait, or is it hiding one of the sharpest cultural critiques of our era? Why did creator Charlie Brooker go to such extreme lengths to confront the limits of human decency? And when artistic expression becomes a toy for public hunger, who exactly is to blame for the collective descent into this twisted spectacle? Let's go behind the lens and decode the deeper, disturbing creative engine that powers one of the most controversial television debuts in modern history. To truly understand Black Mirror, a series designed to push the audience to their psychological limits, we need to step into the mind of its creator and ask, where did it all begin? Charlie Brooker, the writer and creator of the show, started his career as a razor-sharp media critic. Known for his biting commentary on the British press and global media culture, Brooker has long distrusted the toxic blend of voyeurism, clickbait, and ethical erosion that defines the modern infotainment machine. By 2011, he decided to translate years of media critique into something even more jarring, something that couldn't be ignored. Thus, Black Mirror was born. And the National Anthem? It was his boldest move yet. In interviews, Brooker revealed that the inspiration for the episode came from a dark but compelling question. If the media went far enough, would the public really watch the world burn just to feel something? Fueled by this terrifying curiosity, Brooker crafted a scenario where a fictional UK Prime Minister is forced to perform an unspeakable act on live television, all to save a kidnapped princess. But it's not really about the princess. It's about us. Of course, getting this story to screen was no easy feat. When Brooker first pitched the pilot, major networks rejected it outright. They feared the content was too extreme, too disturbing, and frankly, too honest for the average viewer. But Brooker wouldn't budge. He believed the true purpose of art wasn't comfort, it was confrontation. To peel back the surface and poke at the raw, exposed nerve of society. Even within the production team, the infamous pig scene sparked intense debate. Some crew members lobbied to tone it down or replace it altogether with something more palatable. But Brooker and director Otto Bathurst fought to keep it. For them, the shock wasn't gratuitous, it was essential. Without that extremity, the story's moral dilemma would lose its teeth. Black Mirror would become just another cautionary tale, rather than a scream echoing across a media-saturated void. Eventually, Channel 4 took a chance, and the rest is cultural history. It's worth noting that the original script included even more political chess games, psychological tension, and deeper commentary on government media dynamics. But to sharpen the pacing and heighten the emotional gut punch, the team trimmed the fat. What remained was a lean, harrowing narrative laser-focused on human shame, consent, and complicity. Since its release, the National Anthem has transcended fiction. In 2015, it was eerily paralleled by a real-life scandal involving then Prime Minister David Cameron, dubbed Piggate. The media frenzy that followed blurred the line between satire and reality so thoroughly that even Brooker himself admitted, "I never imagined life would imitate fiction this closely." So now, knowing how deliberately crafted and narrowly approved this story was, we must ask, what's hiding in its visual grammar? Why does every ordinary character feel like they're part of a much larger indictment? If you're ready, we'll peel back the next layer, visual metaphor, narrative architecture, and the symbolic role of every player in this twisted national tragedy. From its visual storytelling to character construction, the National Anthem oozes with a biting critique of modern society. If this episode were a painting, the director's camera would be the cold, precise brush, sketching out the brutal tension between morality and spectacle. Let's start with color and composition. Director Otto Bathurst opens the episode with a wash of icy tones. The Prime Minister jolted awake in a room bathed in pale, sterile light, steel blue walls closing in around him. dawn's bleak glow pressing through drawn curtains. The camera slowly creeps in, framing his hunched figure dead center. The mood is suffocating, anxious. These cool hues do more than convey the burden on our protagonist. They reflect the clinical apathy of the digital age, the violation of privacy, the distortion of truth, the omnipresence of surveillance. Then a stark shift. The kidnapper's video is drenched in saturated reds. Against a black mask, that searing backdrop becomes an assault on the senses, symbolizing primal danger and carnal provocation. Later, the cool blue gleam from countless phone screens reflects off crowds mesmerized by the unfolding spectacle, reminding us, this tragedy is fueled not by a villain, but by our own compulsive appetite for voyeurism. Another powerful tool? Camera movement. The episode uses handheld shots and frenetic edits to amplify the chaos sweeping through government halls and media centers. Inside Downing Street, the shaky frames and quick cuts mirror both Callow's internal panic and the erosion of societal order. But when the live stream begins, everything freezes. The camera steadies calm, cold, unflinching. We're no longer just watching. We've become part of the gaze. That still frame becomes a silent indictment, confronting us with an uncomfortable truth. The real accomplice isn't on screen. It's every one of us watching. And while Michael Callow commands the screen, supporting characters quietly intensify the story's moral weight. Take his wife, Jane. Her emotional arc mirrors the public's shifting mood. Initial support turns into revulsion and shame. Through her, we witness how empathy curdles into judgment once personal cost enters the frame. Then there's Home Secretary Alex Cairns, stoic, pragmatic, and chillingly detached. Her presence reflects the institutional rot, calm, composed, and completely compromised. These ordinary characters expose how societal collapse is less a thunderclap than a quiet, collective shrug. The episode also brims with symbolic cues and philosophical provocation. The kidnapper, artist Carlton Bloom, carries a name laced with irony, Bloom, something that flourishes. His twisted plan and eventual suicide are like a grotesque flower unfurling, a warped beauty meant to unmask societal hypocrisy. His death is quietly swept under the rug, echoing how society often refuses to confront its own sickness, preferring to consume pain as spectacle and move on. From a philosophical standpoint, the National Anthem poses one of the oldest, hardest questions in ethics. Does the happiness of the many justify the degradation of one? It's a brutal, cinematic face-off between utilitarianism and individual dignity. The episode doesn't answer. It lets the question hang in the air, festering. This is just the beginning of what the episode's visual and character work reveals. But what deeper meanings are woven into its narrative architecture? What personal fingerprints of the creator mark its structure? The magic of narrative lies in how it steers the viewer's mind, and Charlie Brooker's script for the National Anthem is less a TV drama than a social experiment in psychological control. At first glance, it plays out as a traditional linear story. But beneath the surface, it's laced with converging timelines, rapid shifts, and parallel threads that generate near-constant tension. We begin with a shocking premise, then are immediately pulled into the machinery of statecraft, PR, and media spin. These simultaneous tracks grip the viewer in a rising swell of dread. Brooker strategically employs a countdown mechanism, clocks ticking, on-screen reminders of time remaining, each one ratcheting up the urgency. The viewer feels it in their gut, that mounting anxiety, that stomach-turning curiosity. It's a shared sensation with the fictional public. That's no accident. The audience in the story becomes the audience at home. When compared to Brooker's other work, from his satirical show Screenwipe to later Black Mirror episodes, a pattern emerges. He doesn't hand you moral conclusions. Instead, he sets traps. Ordinary desires, entertainment, justice, information, are pushed to grotesque extremes until viewers are forced to reckon with what they've cheered on. His genius is in the discomfort, the slow realization that the monster isn't the man on screen, but the person holding the remote. And that's precisely why this episode sparked such division among critics and academics. Some labeled it exploitative, arguing that it pandered to the same impulses it claimed to condemn. Others praised its brutal honesty, calling it a necessary gut punch that lays bare the parasitic relationship between media, power, and public complicity. That polarized response is the point. Every viewer walks away from the National Anthem carrying a different scar, depending on their own beliefs. And that's narrative success. Not consensus, but confrontation. One of the most brilliant structural choices arrives at the end. We learn that Princess Susanna was released before the broadcast ever aired. That reveal, delayed until after the act, turns tragedy into farce. It reframes everything. We realize the horror could have been avoided. But the audience, both in the show and in real life, was already too deep. We were too busy watching. Brooker originally wrote a longer version with more political chess games, more media satire. But in the end, he cut much of that. He stripped the narrative down to a single moral rupture, one that hits fast and hard. The decision wasn't a loss, it was a scalpel. It ensured the real message hit home. Under the right spotlight, our ethical foundations are disturbingly fragile. When we revisit the national anthem, what haunts us isn't the outrageous act, it's how quietly we accepted it. Even worse, how much we wanted to see what happened next. That's the brilliance of the structure. It doesn't just tell a story, it exposes us. Now the question is, what kind of world created a story like this? Are these just isolated horrors, or symptoms of a much deeper cultural illness? Every work of art that truly shakes us to our core is rarely born in a vacuum. The national anthem didn't materialize out of nowhere. It's the inevitable collision of modern society, institutional power, and media spectacle. To truly grasp its weight, we need to zoom out and examine the broader social and historical forces behind it. On the surface, the premise may seem absurd, an isolated, extreme incident. But what Charlie Brooker captures with chilling precision is something far more insidious, a deeply entrenched cultural pathology. How easily we, as a society, are manipulated by media and social networks, our curiosity hijacked, our desires exploited, and how this manipulation masks a brutal dance of power and moral compromise. To understand this episode's roots, we need to go back to the early 2000s, the era of exploding internet access and cutthroat media competition. As the information age accelerated, the ethical guardrails of traditional journalism began to erode. In their place, clickbait, viral metrics, and the ruthless pursuit of attention. In this new economy, privacy and dignity became expendable. Truth took a backseat to shock value and spectacle. And in the show, we see this dynamic laid bare. The government attempts to contain the narrative, only to be overwhelmed by the speed of online virality. The media amplifies the grotesque, transforming tragedy into mass entertainment. And the public, seemingly passive, becomes the true engine driving the whole machine. What looks like absurdist fiction becomes an eerily accurate mirror of a society spiraling into moral freefall. Through the Prime Minister's dilemma, we witness the systemic nature of this crisis, how power structures, when combined with media exposure, pit personal dignity against public expectation. Callow becomes a symbol, forced to sacrifice his humanity on the altar of national interest. There's no escape. And that's the bitter truth the national anthem exposes. In the modern world, individual identity is frighteningly fragile in the face of institutional machinery and public gaze. From a sociological and philosophical lens, this isn't a freak occurrence. It's symptomatic of a deeper cultural malaise. The episode paints a portrait of what John Stuart Mill warned against, the tyranny of the majority. When the public's voyeuristic hunger becomes dominant, individual dignity is crushed beneath it. Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil echoes throughout. Ordinary people, complicit not through malice but indifference, enabling catastrophic outcomes. Through Carlton Bloom, the so-called artist kidnapper, we see the murky overlap of performance art and social critique. His stunt is framed as a radical form of performance art designed to expose the public's hypocrisy and the media's insatiable greed. It's reminiscent of real-world provocateurs like Marina Abramovic, whose art confronts cruelty and apathy head-on. The episode quietly raises the question, where are the limits of art? Can it justify harm in pursuit of truth? This parable-like storytelling doesn't just peel back society's wounds. It suggests these aren't rare diseases, but everyday symptoms. When the public and media collude in the consumption of pain, how much dignity can a person truly retain? When the credits roll, what lingers isn't the act itself, it's the cultural aftershock. The national anthem didn't just start conversations. It ripped open a cultural divide, exposing how conflicted we truly are about morality, spectacle, and the role of media. Audiences were split. Some saw the episode as gratuitous and cruel, pandering to base instincts under the guise of social commentary. Others saw it as courageous and necessary, forcing us to look in the mirror and confront the hypocrisy of our modern gaze. These polarized reactions speak volumes. We live in a society fundamentally torn over the boundaries of art, the elasticity of ethics, and the truth about who we really are when no one's watching. The most pressing question isn't what happened, but who bears responsibility. And here's the brilliance of Charlie Brooker's design. There's no clear villain. Everyone is complicit. Bloom dies for his twisted message. The media capitalizes, turning private horror into public theater. The public, for all its gasps and outrage, watches anyway, gripped, entertained, transfixed. Even the Prime Minister, ostensibly the victim, is part of the system. His compromises and rationalizations make him just another cog in the machine. This diffusion of responsibility mirrors something all too real, the modern crisis of accountability. No one answers for the harm. No one steps forward. As time passes, the scandal fades. And in the episode's most chilling detail, a year later, the PM's approval ratings are up. The public has moved on, forgotten the trauma, forgotten the shame. That's not just satire, it's prophecy. And from a moral perspective, this live broadcast is a disaster. It breaks every ethical rule. But the horror isn't just in what happened, it's in how it happened. Slowly, incrementally, enabled not by monsters, but by the gentle nudge of public discourse and media pressure. When we start focusing on the event instead of the ethics, justice is already dead. Our morality has already been sold for ad impressions. In interviews, Brooker himself has said the episode was meant to expose the banality of complicity. People aren't inherently evil, but strip away identity, accountability, and consequence, and they become spectators to evil. That's the scariest part. The real monster might just be the audience. And this isn't a niche issue. This is a diagnosis of everyone living in a networked world. What we're seeing isn't fiction, it's our fractured society reflected back at us. Media, power, and morality are now in open war. The emotional fallout and cultural whiplash this episode provokes? That's not just commentary. It's a siren. It's a warning. So the final question is this: how close are we to becoming the world the National Anthem warned us about? Or worse, are we already there? For many who've watched the National Anthem, the question inevitably surfaces: could something this absurd and horrific ever really happen? The unsettling answer is yes. Not only is it possible, but in some ways it's already happening. The episode functions as an extreme, but eerily precise, forecast of a world just around the corner. And in the decade plus since its original broadcast, our reality has edged ever closer to, and in some cases surpassed, the bleakest imaginings of its creators. Let's start by examining the broader media landscape and online culture in recent years. The rise of social media, the viral acceleration of information, and an unchecked appetite for personal voyeurism have turned privacy and dignity into disposable commodities. Once someone becomes the center of public scrutiny, their private life is fair game, ruthlessly exposed, dissected, and often turned into entertainment. The scene in which the Prime Minister caves to public demand is not just satirical fiction. It mirrors the ways online harassment and mob outrage can erode personal boundaries and dignity. We've seen this play out again and again with political figures and celebrities alike. Leaked private messages, scandalous photos, and even misinformation have been weaponized for viral attention. Public discourse now dances between moral indignation and gleeful consumption, blurring the line between justice and spectacle. Consider just how precisely some scenes from the National Anthem have manifested in the real world. The most infamous example? 2015's Piggate scandal involving former UK Prime Minister David Cameron. A bizarre and humiliating college-era rumor surfaced, went viral, and became global fodder. It was a real-world echo of Brooker's fictional scenario, so uncanny it seemed satire had bled into fact. The incident was a chilling confirmation of how easily the public's curiosity and media's appetite for scandal can spiral out of control. Then there's the show's depiction of national voyeurism, a live broadcast consumed by millions. That's no longer fiction. We now live in a live stream economy. Whether it's influencer meltdowns, viral arrests, or people documenting their most intimate crises in real time, society has normalized public humiliation as entertainment. The culture of live stream shame, so vividly captured in the episode, is everywhere, from revenge porn to TikTok exposés to the weaponization of cancel culture. Today, it feels as though we're all living one trending hashtag away from becoming the main character in our own public nightmare. This shift toward collective entertainment consumption, where tragedy is rebranded as content, is exactly what the National Anthem sought to warn us about. So, how do we escape this descent into moral absurdity? While the episode doesn't offer direct solutions, it points toward one path forward, a critical re-examination of media ethics and the public's own moral compass. In a world saturated by information and manipulated emotion, the ability to pause, question, and think critically is more essential than ever. Only when the public can distinguish between genuine outrage and manufactured spectacle can we prevent these scenarios from repeating in real life. And perhaps one of the most quietly powerful messages of the episode is about human fragility. The Prime Minister may have ultimately given in, but his internal turmoil, the shame, the helplessness, the raw human pain, feels painfully real. In our own lives, we too may face impossible choices, and the show reminds us that behind every headline, every scandal, is a human being. One we should try to understand before we mock or condemn. This is not a warning about some distant dystopia. It's about right now, and the role we each play in either resisting or enabling it. In this sense, the episode isn't satire, it's prophecy. What makes the national anthem even more haunting is the way it blurred the line between fiction and reality, and how that line continues to dissolve. The episode has long transcended its status as just a piece of television. It has become a cultural touchstone, referenced in memes, academic syllabi, and even ethical case studies. The now iconic plot of a national leader's public humiliation is used to critique everything from political scandals to celebrity tabloid culture. Its themes are taught in media ethics classes, its scenes dissected by future journalists and cultural theorists alike. But its influence goes even deeper. It sparked a new wave of storytelling that explores the blurred boundaries between privacy, performance, and public judgment. Creators across media have riffed on its ideas, films, shows, novels, all grappling with the complex dance between personal identity and mass entertainment. In academia, the national anthem is frequently cited as a foundational text in discussions about digital ethics, surveillance capitalism, and performative politics. With that in mind, here are some lesser-known films and books that echo the national anthem's themes and may offer deeper insight. Recommended films: Nightcrawler 2014. A dark tale of media ethics as a freelance crime journalist spirals into moral bankruptcy for the sake of ratings. Untraceable 2008. A disturbing portrait of how digital audiences can become complicit in real-world violence through spectacle and passivity. Recommended books: Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, a prophetic exploration of how television and entertainment culture erode critical thought and moral discernment. The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, a classic psychological study of how collective behavior can override individual rationality and ethical standards. These works, like the national anthem, force us to ask, what happens when the spectacle becomes more important than the truth? When the public's gaze becomes a weapon? When empathy is replaced by engagement metrics? Ultimately, the national anthem leaves us with more questions than answers. And that's the point. What if the story had gone differently? What if the Prime Minister had refused? Would history, or our own culture, look any different? Or would we simply have moved on to the next tragedy, the next meme, the next spectacle to consume? That final question lingers, not just on screen, but in every corner of our online lives. As Michael Callow said, "I'd do anything for my country." At the climax of the episode, this line sounds like the solemn vow of a leader, an act of patriotism. But under the cold, voyeuristic gaze of millions of unblinking screens, it morphs into something else entirely, the fuse to a national tragedy. No longer a political promise, it becomes the currency of sacrifice, a man reduced to a spectacle in exchange for collective security. It's the final line modern democracy crosses when performance and politics become indistinguishable, when dignity is auctioned off under the guise of public interest. And when we finally snap out of it, we're hit by the brutal irony of that pledge. It's no longer about loyalty, but about complicity. It forces us to ask, when power and media collude to turn national duty into personal humiliation, whose country are we really serving? And is it still worth sacrificing yourself for? Now imagine, what if the ending had gone another way? What if Callow had said no, had let his career implode rather than capitulate? He might have become a symbol of resistance to media tyranny. Or what if he had transferred power, refusing to play the game, sparking a public reckoning about media justice and the true meaning of national dignity? In those alternate timelines, the national anthem could have become a rare story of heroism in modern politics. But that's not the story Brooker wanted to tell. Because Brooker didn't want to hand us comfort, he wanted to hand us discomfort. And it's that discomfort that lingers long after the credits roll. Through its narrative architecture, emotional manipulation, and chilling mirror of the media public feedback loop, the National Anthem doesn't just tell a story, it straps our entire society to the operating table and peels back the skin. And when it's over, there's no blooper reel. No behind-the-scenes gag to soften the blow. That's by design. There's no relief. Just the haunting silence that follows, and the uncomfortable question echoing in our minds. If the next broadcast demands your view, will you press play again? Clapperboard, drop a single emoji in the comments to capture how this episode of Black Mirror made you feel. Face screaming in fear, crying face, exploding head, brain, television, fire. We don't need another recap. We need to talk about what it means to be human. If you found this kind of deep analysis thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Every week, we'll be digging into the truths buried beneath the plot, the social realities, the ethical contradictions, and the shadows of human nature. The next mental challenge is waiting. Are you ready to face it,